This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Rabbi Sai, welcome this morning. We're continuing the subject we've been doing for the last couple of weeks, and hopefully today we will complete it. We're up to Titanic, Part 9. Okay, so we've discussed many principles in terms of we learned the Sugya, Ma'im Shein Lahem Soif, and we discussed other She'elos, for example, the case of the plane that fell in the English Channel, but we have not dealt with any specific response that dealt specifically with the Titanic, and that's what we're going to do today. First, we're going to speak about something that was written in a journal, and then we'll learn the one tshuva that we have that was written about the Titanic. We go to Maramaka number 38. So let me give you a little bit of an introduction. Because there are so many opinions and questions among the Rabbanim, so the Rabbanim turned to the greatest Go'onim of the era to try to deal with the Agunos. There was a Go'on by the name of Rabbi Levi Sternberg, a Rav in Dumbroben, who is the son-in-law of Hagon of Chaim Mordechai Roller, the Avbezin of Niyamitz, who is one of the Manhige Mizrahi in Serbia. And the question was posed to him. And there was a lot of pressure to come up with a specific answer, because all the newspapers were really stirring up a lot of pressure on the Rabbanon to come up with a pisron, to come up with a conclusion and a solution for these agunos. And this Rav Levi Sternberg, used the pages of the Torah journal called Ma'asef, that was published in Yerushalayim, and he called out to the Rabbanim that they should all gather together and issue one unified psak. Because if there is controversy among the views of the Rabbanim, then these women are going to be in tremendous turmoil. What do? This Rav says mutter, that Rav says asr. Now what? They get married, their children are going to have problems. So he sort of is galvanizing the Rabbanim to come together in a unified voice. And one of the Rabbanim, Rav Ben Sion Kavinka, who is the Rosh Avbezin Yerushalayim, and was the editor of the Kovetz Hama'asef, where this was a Kovetz that had very wide circulation. He also turns in his Kovetz to the Rabbanim that they should try to save these women. And this Rav Levi Sternberg, he gathered together a number of kulos which he believed would be beneficial for these agunas. So let's read together number 38. Okay, so this is from the journal Ma'asef, Krach Beis, in the 17th year of the journal. B'yoim Beis Chodesh Yom Echad Lirech Tammuz, Baruch Hashem Yom Echad Lirech Tammuz, Shnas Taf Ayin Reish Beis. You see how they change around the letters. There should be Taf Reish Ayin Beis, but that would be Tera'iv. You should be hungry. You should be starving. Instead of Ta'ariv, you should be sweet. And this was written in Dubrovin. So he writes to his friend Moreno Rabbi Tzion Avram Kavinka, who is the editor of the Ma'asef. Achar Drusha Shalom Atov Karoi Liyos L'Gav Rabbi Shekamoisei. After asking about your welfare, Ani Miskabe Levakshoy Lahadfis Es Mamori Akota Nechochi Be'Archinu Hanichbad. I request of you to publish my letter. Hine Kolo Itonim Havriim Harishoy Lamois. Well, the Jewish newspapers are stirring up the world, L'Toivas Agunos, for the benefit of the Agunos Shenitbu Baleim Ba'aniyas Titanic, whose husbands have drowned in the Titanic. V'kivan shel she'elazu yesh yachas yashar rabbanu adatiyim. And since this is something very relevant to the observant rabbis, Kedaya davar shetis rabbi tzavin she'ela gedolazu mikot stadeh b'yarchon rabbani. This should be clarified in this journal. She'elazu hi she'elas hachayim. This is the question of the living. The downtrodden women who remain agunos minitve aniyas Titanic lachein. Therefore, it needs an immediate interpretation. Harabanim haga'onim tzrichim l'chavos es daitam. The Rabbanim Ga'onim need to clarify their opinion, articulate publicly, b'fumbi, api divrei Torah kedosha b'hechla, based on the Torah, hayesh heter lagun skela loy, adar ya adar nish, lo tia tar nasik shtei taras chalila. We can't have division here, ze oisav ze mater, beina heter veina isser tzarch lihivased al yisoides chazakim. Whatever the conclusion is, it has to be based not on guesswork, but it has to be based on fundamental principles. In other words, whatever the conclusion is, it has to be ironclad. It can't be a wishy-washy response. I was concise, intentionally. Play on words. I didn't want to delve into the endless waters of the Torah, the mayim she'en lahem soif of the Torah. In other words, this is not a time to be mafalpel. We got to come with definitive, clear responses. It has to be interpreted concisely, lahalach lamaisa, and I'm just writing tzididei heter in order to arouse conversation about this situation. So, Rabbi Rav Sternberg comes up with 4 heterim to try to allow, specifically in this case of the Titanic, the women to be permitted to remarry. He quotes the Gemara. The Gemara in Yavamis, Nav Kuf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, Tan Rabbana Nafal Amayim Shein Lahem Soif, Sheish Lahem Soif, Ubein Shein Lahem Soif, Ishtay Asura. The opinion of Reb Meir was that if a woman falls into water, she can never remarry. Oh man, thank you. If it's finite water, the woman could get married. That's how we paskin. Yesh lahem soif ishtay mutaras, ein lahem soif asura. Now why? Tam ha'isr, shel mayin she'en lahem soif mavur b'taisvis, halay mishum d'chayshina l'miyot matzoi. We're worried about a likely miyot and itzal mayin she'en lahem soif. That a miyot of people are saved and we don't know where they are. Even though from taisvis it's mashma that even miyuta de miyuta chayshinan, as we pointed out, Tosfos says clearly, even if you have 2 roivs, she's aser. It's only aser because there is a slight possibility that she would be saved from mayim she'en lahem soif. Kedechazinan, Rabbi Akiva, Rav Tarfon, Nitzoilu, the MS. We find Rabbi Akiva and Rav Tarfon were both saved. Aval b'makom she'ein shum efsharas al pi hateva. But in a place where there's no possibility, naturally, hitiru chachamim, the chachamim mattered, v'loi samchu al hanes, and they did not rely on a miracle. In other words, if there in fact is no possibility whatsoever that somebody would have survived, it's mutter. If you remember, the Gemara over there quotes a situation where a guy miraculously resurfaced after having been under the water, and the Gemara says, ignore that. We don't deal with miracles. Remember, the Gemara wanted to know, why is a woman usher to remarry if her husband falls into mayim she'en lahem soif? The Gemara says maybe he fell into a fish pond, or into a crevice where the fish are, and his head is above the water. So the Gemara says, even by mayim sheyesh lahem soif, we should be choishesh, she's still alive. And the Gemara says, no, mayim sheyesh lahem soif, mechila lo shchiach. So we see from here something which is not shchiach at all, we don't have to worry about, and she could get married. And the Ran articulates this, that Reb Meir holds, Adam yachal lechios v'shos mayim yoyma yomayim. And Rabbi Yehuda argues, and Rabbi Yehuda says, ishtay muteres, t'kasavra ein Adam yachal l'shos kol kach l'mayim. Aval mayim she'ein lahem soif, Rabbi Yehuda says it's aser, shema yatsa la'alter l'meirachaik. The Ran says like this, you know why mayim she'ein lahem soif, the woman can't get married? We're worried, let's say, a wave took him immediately. That implies that if you're so far out into the water, that there's no way a wave immediately took you 1,000 miles back to America. In other words, immediately is in the times of Chazal, you fell into the Mediterranean, so the wave took you to the seacoast. But if you're in the North Atlantic, there's no immediate. You'd need a wave to take you, 1,000 miles. That implies, if there's no possibility that the wave took you out immediately, only after many days, then the case of Mayim She'en Lahem Soif would revert to Mayim She'yesh Lahem Soif. Says the Rav Sternberg, this possibility that we suspect that by Mayim She'en Lahem Soif a wave took you, that's only if there's a real possibility that a wave could have taken you to a coast. In the times of the Gemara, the types of ships they took always stayed somewhat near the seacoast. They weren't going to America in the times of the Gemara. But in our steamships, that they go in the heart of the sea, it is impossible that a wave took the guy to a coast. Even in a few days. The Tshuva, Siman Kuftes, like we learned from Rabbi Kiva Eger said that the Chumrah of Mayim She'en Lahem Soif is only in the times of the Gemara. But Bizman Hazeh, when a ship goes out in the heart of the sea, it's not really possible that a wave took them to the sea course. Whether he drowned close to the shore or far. Because of the Yeshon, the Marishanid Emtzamayim Rachak Bayabasha. So in such a case, the first heter that he gives is that yes, the Gemara is machmer by Mayim She'en Lahem Soif, but that was in those days. But nowadays, it's not really possible. By the way, there is a kovetz over here. If you look at number 39, where he says a very similar type of idea. Let me read to you from Ois Vav in this. He says, Oinirli Lechadesh. This is the Sefer Kovetz Knesses Chachmei Yisrael in volume Hey, Rabbi Avram Yoel Abelson. He says, Nirli Lechadesh by Naguna. He wants to be Mechadesh a new thing. He says, if you look in the Sefer Abris Maimer Tes, Shemetzias Artzis America B'daras HaChoinim, the discovery of America, Mashallah Yadam Mikaidim, which they didn't know about before, because of the new technology. Maritime travel, the proficiency we have in technology today is 10 times as what they used to have. The reason is they didn't have the knowledge. In the olden days, the way they traveled was they would just travel along sea coasts. Vizeh ba'atzmai was the reason why sea travel was so dangerous, because the boat crashed on the rocks, or there were pirates, and so on and so forth. But now that they figured out how to travel in the heart of the sea, they set their sails. V'tzi adir, they have mighty ships, and they come from the ends of the world in 1 year. So says the Kovetz, he says, the halacha is different, because now they go be'emtza hayamim, be'kavim shavim, asher lefam rachai kama me'ez parsos me'hachayfim, it's hundreds of miles, and ken yesh lanu loymar, that when there are chazal choishesh Mayim She'en Lahem Soif, you see, in the olden days, they didn't differentiate between rivers and yamim, they always were choishesh. Because in those days, if the boat broke, it's very, very possible you grabbed onto a raft or a piece of wood, And it's very shaykh, you swam to the coast. Aval atar shasinas biyamim agdam hochem davka be'emtza merchak rav. Actually natzel. In the last 10 years, we never heard of one person that drowned in the middle of the ocean that survived. How's he surviving? But he's Michael Phelps, that he's going to swim. Nobody could survive such a swim. Okay, nowadays it's Mirotimia. So that's the first heter that Rav Sternberg brings up, and this is a heter that others also mention. Look in Ois Beis, back in number 38. Remember back we learned the Machlokes, the Shita of the Mabit. The Mabit's opinion was that when a person falls into the water, that's Mayim Shein Lahem Soif. When the water comes onto the boat, that's Mayim Sheyesh Lahem Soif, because the person is limited, is trapped on the boat. And if the water came on the boat, there's no way the person survived that. Where are they going? They're inside the cabin, the water comes in, there's no way out. That was the heter of the Mabit, which we mentioned the Beis Yosef argued on. The third heter, look in Gimel. Kivan de nitbu harbe meos anoshim. Hundreds of people drowned. Umikulam loy ba'echa mehem. Nobody came back. You see, there's always a problem that if two people were on a boat and we didn't discover the two of them, we're afraid they made some kind of scam, and they both said, you know what, let's not tell our wives, and let's start life over again. That's the chashash. But if there are 100 people on the boat, you can't pull off a scam with 100 people. Someone's going to spill the beans. So if 100 people, hundreds of people are on the Titanic, and not even one person spilled the beans, you know why? Because they're all dead, that's why. Most of them, if not all of them, drowned, then it's another rive. It's an additional rive. That the Jews on the boat were from the rive who drowned. We say that another rive doesn't help. We said if the person who drowned is a tzur b'mirabanan, we don't rely on the second rive. He says, the answer is, it's different roiv than Tzur Rabbanan. Because why? He says an interesting svara. This guy's a big rabbi. It could be in Zimbabwe, they don't know that he's such a chashuv a rav. You know? Why? Because he wrote Hagoyis on Reb Kiva Eger. It could be the cannibals in Zimbabwe do not recognize this person's erudition in Talmudic study. Yeah, but every yid in the shtibel, they know who this is. He's a master lamdan. Could be that the Native American Indians don't necessarily have not heard of this individual. So just because he's a tzur merabanan, it's not going to help us. And especially the boats scanned out the area, and their telegrams and telephones, and they tell us about whatever happened. And if this person would have drowned, we would have known about it. And this is much greater than Tzur Merabanan. In other words, Tzur Merabanan is just two rives. But this type of two rives is so foolproof, it's something you can rely on. As Reb Chaim Volozhiner in the Pischei Tshuva, it's called in the Pischei Tshuva, says you could paskin based on two rives, and Rabbi Avram Yoel Abelson also is mataretz that even by two rives we ask Mayim Shein Lahem Soif. And in the year 1904, there was a similar situation in the boat Valdemir that drowned, and Avram Yoel Abelson mattered it from Odessa based on the two rives, one rive being Mayim Shein Lahem Soif, and the second rive being the fact that nobody really survived, and if somebody would have survived through technology, we would have known about it. So that's the third heter. By the way, he points out, okay, and then finally, so these are really two separate svaras. The third svara is through technology we would have known about it, and besides that, roiv of we haven't found anyone who came back, and therefore we could rely on the fact that there's an additional roiv that the people did not survive. So this is not a tshuva specifically, but this was a letter written in this Torah journal, which this Rev Sternberg wanted to matter the agunos based on his predecessor, Reb Abelson, who permitted women whose husbands were on the boat, Valdemir, in 1904, based on these above-mentioned svaras. Okay, Rabbi, say after the break, we will read the one shuva that exists about the Titanic, and with that, we will close this section of Titanic. I wish you a wonderful break.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.